Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Team Workflow and Executive Buy-in, getting your team to produce great results. My name is Jasmine Cordu, the digital advertising whaler here at Whole Whale. And joining me today are our key presenters, Olivia, also from Whole Whale, and Sarah from Sarah Best Strategy. Olivia is our account strategist whaler here, and Sarah is the CEO and Chief Strategist of Sarah Best Strategy. We will be recording today's webinar, and we will have a Q&A session at the very end, so feel free to leave any and all questions you have in the chat. Sarah, you can get started.
Great. Well, hello, everyone. It's great to be able to spend some time talking with you this afternoon about how to use workflow hacks to get your social media team to produce great results. Just a little bit about who I am. Sarah Best Strategy is my company, and we are based in Madison, Wisconsin and Chicago, Illinois. And our agency focuses on social media and Google search optimization. We work with lots of nonprofits across many nonprofit sectors. And also how we work with people. We do it in two different ways. We work with organizations who want to build strong in-house teams. We do that through independent audits of their social media and search program, through trainings, and support through periods of change, like new staff members. And also we support teams who don't have the bandwidth to manage their social media internally. So that's just a little bit of context. Today's talk has come out of our work doing social media audits on many different clients' accounts. For example, we audited the Nature Conservancy's global social media program, which had 200 accounts and about 60 social media managers. And so what we discovered through that process is that workflow has a very important role in whether your program is successful or not. And of course, all of our clients are successful, and we're just trying to build on that success. But the important thing to know is that even if you have a really perfect plan in place, if you have an ideal plan in place, if you can't implement that plan, it's not going to work very well. And so today I'm going to be talking about some of the common pitfalls that we see through our auditing work, and how some strategies for overcoming some of those roadblocks. So as part of our audit process, what we do is we both review the data, which is something that Whole Whale will talk about at the end of my talk. And we also sit down and talk with people about what's getting in the way of them achieving their goals. So the first common pitfall that we often observe is that there is a lack of a clear vision. And if you don't have a vision, you don't make very good decisions on how to use your resources, such as your time, and also spend any money you have allocated. It can also lead to social media managers feeling demotivated because they don't understand why they're doing what they're doing, and maybe they're getting conflicting information from different sources. So, so my first tip is to craft a clear vision. I'll show you an example in a moment. Statements to motivate your team, prioritize your time and resources, and get executive buy-in, which is also something that Whole Whale will talk about. One thing I just want to note is that even if you have a mission statement as an organization, what I'm talking about is actually a social media specific or digital marketing specific vision statement. So this is an excerpt from Nature Conservancy's vision statement for their social media program. So we transport our fans into the field to see and understand the impact of our work, and invite them through clear and thoughtful calls to action to conserve nature for its own sake and its ability to fulfill our needs and enrich our lives. So this pulls in the Nature Conservancy's mission statement, but it also prioritizes creating content that is in the field. That means that we need to make sure that staff in the field are able to create content, and also that we need to prioritize things like Facebook Lives and other things that do a good job of transporting our online fans into the work that they're doing. So this is a quote from Daniel Pink's book Drive, which considers like the things that motivate us. And so one thing that he said is to animate with purpose, don't motivate with rewards, so extrinsic rewards. And that a shared vision can actually unite your team and help them come together to achieve a goal. So another thing that I hear a lot when I'm talking to different staff is that they're constantly putting out fires. This is often the case when you have a large team, maybe you're working across departments, even at smaller nonprofits that I've worked with, a lot of times they have a development team and a marketing team, and if people are getting you information at the last minute, you might be feeling like you're constantly putting out fires. So one big way of dealing with this is to have cross-department meetings about once a quarter to look at what's coming down the pipeline and to identify opportunities to cross-promote. So another situation I've seen at some of my higher education clients is that maybe two different parts of a department are working on similar efforts, but they haven't, I actually saw this in a museum too, they don't have enough lead time to know that they should be coordinating with each other to cross-promote these similar efforts. And so quarterly meetings don't take up a lot of time, and they can really help get everyone on the same page. So we actually call them same page planning sessions. And it also helps, of course, to set deadlines and promote accountability. It really depends on what your culture is internally, on whether deadlines are the best motivator or if other types of things are a good motivation. Talking to your team about what would help them meet deadlines can be helpful too. So for example, in my work that I did with Easter seals, we found that the match managers who are working with parents and kids and mentors, they needed a certain amount of months notice to get something done, and they preferred a rotation around their team so that not everyone was getting asked for a story or a picture at the same time. So having a talk with your team about what would help them, I think can be really great. Establishing that process internally can be really helpful. And when I do quarterly planning meetings, I actually invite as many people to the room as possible. And that's because I think that everyone owns a different piece of the puzzle. So your executives own your vision. They have the longer term vision for your organization. And if you're doing a planning meeting, executives could start with the first 10 minutes and then leave to do their other things, since we all know that they're very busy. Marcom professionals own the audience and the message, and then sales and customer support, if that's relevant to what you're doing, or perhaps it's volunteer coordinators or other people who are interacting with the public on a regular basis, they will understand what customers are asking questions about. They will understand what they need, and they can contribute some interesting things to the conversation as well. In order to facilitate getting all these people in the same room, focusing on topics at a high level. So here's the things that are coming down the pipeline. Here's our high level topics. Can keep that meeting, make that meeting work. If you get too much into the details of execution at that type of meeting, it can bog everything down and take too long. So focus on the 10,000 foot view. So another common one I think that we've all experienced, no matter what situation that we're in, is that we don't have enough time. And so if we constantly feel like we don't have enough time, that can be really demotivating as well. And so we all know that planning saves you time. So even though it might seem like, when am I going to find an hour to do this planning? If you can carve out 15 minutes a month, or you can carve out uh, a quarterly, like an hour a quarter to sit down with folks, this can prevent you from having to constantly put out fires, and it can ultimately save you time. It allows for you to plan for a layer of well-branded, predictable content. So if your branding is a little bit all over the place, one thing that can help is having at least some of your content pre-planned. We know that we have events and they require being dealt with more in the moment, as well as, press releases and press mentions that come out. But this can really, if you take the time to plan, it will save you time. So another thing that can help with time management is to set goals that make sense within your current bandwidth. So if you brainstorm, I recommend brainstorming broadly because it's if you're in a brainstorming mode, you want those creative juices to be flowing as much as possible, and you want to think more expansively. So when we do, I'm just going to show you. So when we do planning, we often do it on a whiteboard. And one of the reasons that that's helpful is because you can always erase some of the stuff that you've put up. You can edit down. But I recommend brainstorming broadly first and then editing to the amount of stuff that you want or are able to talk about. Similarly with tracking data, if tracking data is something that's new to your organization, you might start by tracking one or two things at first, and then to have a plan to track other goals over time, so that you really are able to truly integrate it into your workflow. And you have to be realistic. I think that everyone can spare at least 15 minutes a month to plan their content, but you do need to have a realistic sense of what bandwidth that you have available. So another tip I'd like to share with you is to try to build a library of evergreen content. And I'll show you an example of that in a moment. But evergreen content is content that, unlike our events or our campaigns, it's content that never goes out of date. So it's the key messages about our organization. It's the information that visitors or guests might want to access on a regular basis on the core pages of our website. It's also the core calls to action that are going to repeat each month. So if you have a call to sign up for your mailing list, you don't need to reinvent the wheel every time. You can write a few different social media posts about signing up for your mailing list and then rotate through those posts. You'll just want to keep track of when was the last time you shared each message. So my team does this for our clients and sets our clients up for this by having a Google Drive spreadsheet that we use that you can save the content in. So that way you can easily keep a record of when the last time was that you used it. Some social media management tools will also allow you to save your content right in your social media management tool too. And that also goes for common responses to questions. So if you're frequently responding to questions from the public, having some of those responses pre-written so that they can be copied and pasted as appropriate would also be something you could keep in an evergreen content spreadsheet. So the first place that I have an organization look when they're looking for evergreen content is to look at the core pages of your website. So this is an example from our client, Easter Seals of DuPage in Fox Valley. A good example is that for the different types of services that they have, such as nutritional therapy or speech language therapy, that information is not going to change very frequently. So you could look at those pages and adapt copy from those pages into social media content, save it in a spreadsheet, and then rotate. So for example, if you wanted to have one content bucket a month, a content bucket is an overarching theme that you might talk about, and maybe one of those themes is services. So if you could talk about one or two of these a month and then rotate. So let's say in month 1, you talk about autism services and occupational therapy. Month 2, you do physical therapy and speech language therapy, etc. Then you would just kind of go through until you got through all of them and then rotate back to the beginning. So having a percentage, like let's say half of your content be pulled from your website, it not only helps you achieve your core goals, because that's why you put them on the website in the first place, it also takes the pressure off having to have something fresh all the time. Maybe you have fresh things that are once a week, maybe you have fresh things as they come up, but this way you have a layer in place that will be well branded, well thought out, and not used too frequently, where you can like rotate between them. If you are a little bit short on time, another thing that you can do is to adapt your content across channels. And so another reason during a planning session, if you want to, that you might want to focus on the 10,000 foot view, is that if you think about topics instead of the specifics of a social media post, you can adapt the topic across different platforms. This isn't going to work for everything. For when I was talking about the Nature Conservancy and they have this great content in the field, now that stuff is going to be fresh and that stuff's going to be rotated more often, and it's also might be a little different from channel to channel. Fresh content on Facebook might take the form of a Facebook Live, where it might take the form of a story on Instagram, for example. But for a lot of your content, you can adapt it across channels. And so my example here is maybe a story about a big and little, which is big brother, big sisters language for talking about mentors and their mentees. So maybe it's a big and little story, and then we have an event, because they also have a lot of fundraising events throughout the year. So just to show you an example, on your website, what that would look like is a blog post and an event listing. And then what that looks like in your newsletter is, 2 articles and a call to action. So same thing, a big and little story, and then an event promo, along with maybe a call to action to become a big. And then finally, on the social media channels, I'm using Facebook as an example, but this could apply to other channels too. You could easily, I would say, you could pull out 1 or 2 things from each story and use it as a Facebook post. And you could also feature the event, and maybe you talk about the event in a slightly different way, such as, talking about the sponsors of the event. And then you have the same call to action. So when you think about the practice of adapting content, you can see how you can save a lot of time, because if you plan from topics, you can plan across channels at the same time, and suddenly it becomes a matter of taking a long piece of content and adapting it into a paragraph, and then adapting it into a snappy quote or 1 line or 2 lines of text. That could save you a lot of time as well. So there are some benefits, because some people have concerns about adapting content, but there's actually a number of benefits to doing this beyond saving you time. One is that we know that people need multiple touch points in order to make a decision. So if you are trying to use your digital marketing channels to cultivate new donors, this would help reinforce your message and help people get to the point where they're ready to make a decision to donate. It's very, the other aspects of branding, when we think about branding, are clarity, consistency, and repetition. And so having consistency across channels is not a bad thing. And I think that if you're able to pre-plan, because you've taken the time to do some planning, it can lead to more clarity in your messages as well. So the other big one that we all face, especially in nonprofits many times is not enough money. So we're often trying to get a lot done on a small budget, and that's not always true. But my personal experience was working in the arts for 6 years, working for the Department of Cultural Affairs at the City of Chicago, and even in a big office like that, we still had to make a lot happen with a little money. And so a couple of strategies that you can use are to, once you have a clear vision, you can use that to prioritize what you're spending your money on. So in the example that I gave you of the Nature Conservancy, one thing you might prioritize in that case is, say, a GoPro camera that would allow you to capture good video in the field. You can also advocate for what you need. If you say, look, this is our vision, and this is what impact we expect from these activities. But we just need this particular resource in order to do that. So when I talk to some nonprofits, for example, they'll say, we would love to tell the story of all of the great things that are happening at our events. Like, we want to show how much fun people are having, and we want to showcase, the awardees or something. If you don't have a good camera to take a picture of that, or a photographer, that's a resource that you really need in order to achieve that goal. So you really should start with goals and then figure out what resources that you need to overcome any roadblocks you might have to achieving those goals. And then a couple of ways you can stretch your budget. One is to think about loaner libraries of equipment. So if your staff need something, like often it's cameras, maybe their phones don't have good cameras on them, you could always have something that people could check out for the things that they need. Another thing is to save money on trainings. What you could do is spend some time finding what people on your team are good at. Usually one of the things I do when I'm auditing and I'm interviewing staff is to find out what their superpowers are. And some people are really great at Instagram. Some people are really knowledgeable about advertising. Some people are knowledgeable about, something. So whatever their strengths are, having them set up to share their stories. And this is particularly true if you have like a bigger team, or if you're working across departments, or even working across field offices or locations. Sponsoring a brown bag lunch to celebrate those strengths can be a really great way to lift everyone up. Or you could have peer-to-peer mentoring. So if someone's newer and someone's been there for a while, you could pair them together. If someone's really good at one thing but not at another thing, they could swap skills with each other. So that's just a way to lift everyone up and support each other without spending a lot of money. The other thing is tools. So one obstacle I often see is that people really want to pull reports on metrics that are requested by their higher ups, but they might not have the resources to actually pull those reports in a time efficient way. And so you should at least have that conversation to determine what you can pull with the tools you do have and what you might need additional tools for, and make decisions about whether you just want to stick to the things that you can pull for free, such as information from Google Analytics, or if you want to invest in a tool that would help you pull other reports without having to spend a lot of time on them. Another related topic that frequently comes up, and this is really the second to last one, is unable to measure ROI. So not having data in your life can make your life really difficult, right? And so there's a set of obstacles that people have specific to data that we can strategize around. One is to even just get started. So if you're not super comfortable with data, if you measure less at first, that can really help, and then add goals on over time. And then one way to focus what you're tracking, because a lot of people come to me and they say, you know, I'm not really sure what goals I should set or how to track them, is to focus on thinking about what do you want people to do as a result of seeing your social media posts? And then what is the data that can show us whether people have done that thing or not? So sometimes that is like, let's say we want to get donations. Sometimes that is looking at how many people saw the donations posts, how many people got to that page on the website, and then how many people finished filling out the form. So, so that's how we might think about metrics, is to focus on what the actions that we want people to take. If you have a large team and you're working across different departments or different offices, having a template for your reports can be really helpful, because one thing I've seen at larger institutions is that you might be getting different data from everyone, which makes it much harder to make a case to your higher ups. And so giving people a report on what you want them to pull can make that process really seamless. I often see this with people that have multiple sites that they're working across. Finally, poor branding. So maybe your tone is all over the place. It could be because you have volunteers and staff working on your social channels. Maybe your visual brand is not as focused as it could be. So beyond having a brand guide, the more you can set up templates, the better. Canva is a great tool that I use for our clients in creating consistently branded graphics. It's a cloud-based graphics tool, but you could use the same idea with other graphic design systems. If you're able to have a similar template but then swap in different information, that could be really helpful. An advantage of Canva is that you don't necessarily need to work with a graphic designer, because sometimes graphic designers are tied up with more expansive things like annual reports or things like that. So I know an obstacle of managing social media sometimes is just even getting those graphics back. So using a self-service tool that's set up for non-designers can be a really helpful way to stick to your branding. If you have a paid account, you can also save your favorite fonts and your logo in there and just drop them into your graphics. It makes it very easy. And so those are most of my tips. I'm going to share a bonus tip with you. And this bonus tip is really focused on if you have a special campaign going on. So it's not something that you might want to do all the time. So a lot of times when we think about setting goals for our social media or other digital marketing, we always want to improve upon ourselves. So let's say we want a 10% increase in our website traffic this quarter or something like that. And those types of goals are important. But one thing that you could think about if you have a big event or a campaign going on is to give people the flexibility to work together as a team to achieve a numeric goal. So let's say you want to get 1,000 website visits. If everyone is given the permission to achieve that goal in the way that's best for them, like let's say one person's got a really great Twitter network and another person is really focused on LinkedIn. Sometimes that's okay. And sometimes it's all right if you need to share things more than once, like on Twitter, for example, to meet your goal. And so this is just an idea that instead of necessarily just having this goal that doesn't motivate us, like what if we all work together in the ways that we're best at to achieve our goal for that campaign? So that's just a thought. So maybe someone creates a well-optimized blog post that drives Google traffic and someone else reaches out to his network via email. It's just an alternative way of thinking about things. And so this is another quote from Daniel Pink: pitting coworkers against one another in the hope that competition will spark them to perform better rarely works and almost always undermines our motivation. So if you're going to use a C word, let's go with collaboration or cooperation. So that is the end of my part of the talk. And then with that, I will turn things back over to Whole Whale.
Thanks so much, Sarah. This is Olivia here from Whole Whale, and we're going to now move over to talking about a little bit more on numbers. So as Jasmine mentioned, at Whole Whale, we are a digital agency that leverages web data and technology to help increase the impact of nonprofits. That is me on the left and Jasmine on the right. And we're going to talk a little bit about the what and why of data culture, layering in some more of the actual metrics we can drill in on now that we have a great sense of strategy from Sarah. We'll also talk about how data drives the impact of your organization, not only the impact we see online, but that big, huge, and ambitious reason that your organization came to being in the first place. We'll talk about how to build this data culture, looking at the combination of people, process, and product, and a couple of killers of data culture, because data culture does have its mortal enemies and its kryptonite. So what data and culture are separately, and these are distilled from the distilled from Webster's dictionary, but we can basically look at culture as a collective behavior and tradition, and at data as collective information often used to analyze or improve behavior. So we can see already where these two terms start to complement one another. And then the data culture is asking, what do the data say, and acting on the results, even if tradition may tell us to do otherwise, as my friend Tevye here is showing us. This is also highly dependent that staff on all levels are able to measure the outcomes, act based on the available data, and build on existing knowledge over time. This isn't just saying, okay, we are a data culture now. This is always questioning our gut, questioning our assumptions, questioning our traditions, and having anyone on the team be able to make a call based on what the data say. Why this is so important is that big data is growing in terms of both quantity and quality. We are seeing 2.5 quintillion bytes created daily of data, and 90% of that data was created in the last 2 years. Data is also passive, and it's upon us as people to make it active. We use data as a compass, and our questions and vision forge the path forward. And data helps us to do our job better and in less time. The best chess player in the world is that type of a chess player is better than Bobby Fischer because of the data that has helped them to do their job that much better. We can also use human-assisted machine learning so that we're not having our jobs taken over by robots, but we are just allowing certain tasks that we do day over day to become more automated so that we can do things that our brains are equipped for, which are higher levels of thinking and action. So when I'm talking about data, let's break that down into 4 V's. We look at the volume, how much in size, especially bytes and growth. We look at velocity, real time versus delayed. How quickly is the data we're looking to collect gathered and acted on? Again, machines and automation have really improved how quickly we can get meaningful data based on the efforts we're putting out. The variety, the types of data sources, looking at structured and unstructured data, qualitative and quantitative, and it's never just one or the other. How are we combining these two types of data sources in order to get a greater 3-dimensional understanding of our work? And then the veracity of data. So we also call this GIGO, or garbage in, garbage out. Because we can collect any number of, we can collect all the data we want, but do we trust it at the end of the day? And so we want to make sure that when we're collecting data and when we're operating as a data-driven organization, that we're accounting for these 4 elements of data, because each one on its own is highly important, but it's the four of them together that really make for the Justice League of America of data. And then this breaks down into the culture in three ways. 50% of our data culture is going to rely on the people that make it. 30% goes into process and 20% into product. So people are 50%, and they are the most important because it's the people that are key to building and sustaining a data culture. As I mentioned, our metrics are a compass, but a compass on its own is just pointing in a direction. It really takes the initiative of a person to pick up that compass, point it in the direction we want to go, and lead the way. With that in mind, all levels also must recognize the importance of embracing data. And this is led from the top on down. If there is no executive vision and leadership around data, it's going to be very hard to convince anyone else to take that on. So when we're looking at building a data culture within an organization and building in that capacity to an analytic approach to decision making, which can be very hard because we love our guts, but our guts are wrong. And so we want to ask a few key questions. We ask, what is our staff structure as it relates to data reporting? Who is doing it? How many people on the team are doing it? And does everyone have the training they need to understand the data that's relevant to their department? Do we understand not only the data itself, but do we know how to glean insights and actionable steps from data? One of my favorite quotes from Avinash Kaushik, who is an evangelist with Google Analytics, says that if you're reporting on your data to your boss, to your board, and their response after your report is, oh, that was really interesting data, your data report has failed. It's really that you want to convince anybody in the room, regardless of their experience with data analytics. Through your presentation, you want to give them the response of saying, okay, I know the next 3 things we're going to do based on these data. We want everyone to understand those actionable steps. And then we also want to make sure that within the team, we have good working relationships with data analysts, because the spoiler alert to what kills a data culture is data siloing, data fiefdom, the idea of protecting data and protecting access to data based on tradition, based on who within the organization controls it. We really want to democratize the data that is within an organization so that everyone can understand exactly how the outputs that we're creating every day affect the outcomes of our organization. And we'll talk about that chasm in just a little bit. Meanwhile, though, I want to touch on process, because that's the other main component of a data culture, is that 30% of this should be in process, adopted by people. We want to make sure we have strong structures in place to institutionalize a knowledge about the data and an understanding of what to do next, avoiding those fiefdoms and silos that I just mentioned. We want to make sure that this is a very democratic distribution of data, partly because that access to data is going to foster what Dan Rees calls a build, measure, learn philosophy. How can I measure the success of this product? How can I build it? And then what can I learn from that? And we also want to make sure that feedback provided by the data informs decisions. This is part of the process. This is part of that build, measure, learn cycle. So some questions we ask around this point is data being accessed and communicated well across teams? Not just can we do it, but are we doing it well? Can we act on the data or regularly share insights from experiments? Can we track our goals using metrics? We'll talk about Google Analytics goals in just a moment. How often are we receiving feedback from our data? How often are we talking to it? It's a relationship. It's like a marriage. If I'm not talking to my husband at least a couple times a week, then he's basically just the roommate that shares my apartment. And I mean, he's still paying half the rent, so I guess that's still good. But you know, we want to have a feedback. Finally, product is 20%. And Sarah touched on tools, which are incredibly useful, but they are not the solution. They just help us get to that solution. To that end, they should support the culture and embody that build, measure, learn approach. but it shouldn't be seen as we got this tool and now we're all set. There also needs to be that collective buy-in and support for learning a new tool. And this is something that comes up a lot with our clients at Whole Whale, where they say, well, should we get this? Should we get that? Sure, you could get it. Is it actually going to augment your efficiency and augment your work experience? Or is it just going to be another tool that you have to learn to use, and then it sits in your closet like the bread maker that you get for your wedding? Questions to ask at the product stage are, do we have the tools in place to analyze our large data sets? Excel only gets you so far. Are we using consistent naming and storage conventions? This is highly important, especially when you have either a large team, a growing team, or a team with a bit of turnaround, because you want to make sure that everyone understands and everyone is speaking the same language. We also want to make sure that dashboards and metrics are updated as automatically as possible and sending out automatically. This also helps us to store our data in a way that anyone can report on it if needed. And then on a very practical level, we want to make sure that we're doing some semi-annual security audits and changing our passwords, because Post-its are not our passwords anymore. So I mentioned before the outputs and outcomes, and we like to call this crossing the digital impact chasm, where we have what we do every day when we come into the office, and we have on the other side of this chasm, the outcomes, the reason that we took our jobs in the first place, whether that is to cure world poverty, to end lung cancer, to make sure that every kid is reaching a certain level of literacy. But how do we know what we're doing on our website, with our strategy, with our social media, is actually getting us to that outcome? So we look for some indicators that can get us across that bridge, and we look for the SMART acronym. We look for indicators that are specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and time-bound. And then if, like me, you are a fan of Velvet Underground, we also like to add a little bit of VU, which is valid and understandable, because if I can't understand the indicators and they aren't valid, then it doesn't really matter if they're smart. We then use these indicators to set measurable goals. And one of our favorite case studies at Whole Whale around this, partially because it has to do with water, is will it make the boat go faster? This is the story of a New Zealand rowing team that went from worst to first in the 2000 Olympics based on getting a new coach and prioritizing the right metric, because you can look at Olympic rowing performance on any number of levels in terms of what to measure. But if you just measure against this question, will it make the boat go faster, which is what they started to ask of every decision they were going to make, the results began to take care of themselves. They were focusing on the performance, and they were distilling that performance down to one very simple but not always easy outcome, which is making the boat go faster. That's it. This is what we would call a key performance indicator. And we can also look at this from another sports metaphor of running a marathon. Maybe that's your goal. Maybe your stretch goal is qualifying for the Boston Marathon, because who doesn't love a good stretch goal in the nonprofit world? So then for our key performance indicator around this, or our North Star metric, the one metric to rule them all, we may look at this as the healthy number of miles we run per week, because very few of us can just get up, go out, and run 26 miles and change. That said, there are other metrics that we need to take into account that sort of build up to this healthy miles per week. Those could involve shoes that we're wearing, the miles that we run each day, our workouts in addition to running, the food we're eating, the sleep we're getting, how much water we have, the weather, the altitude. There are so many metrics, but we want to make sure that we're picking one and then finding the metrics that support that metric. We can then look at these metrics in one of our funnel models, which is the funnel of engagement. And when we have people who are taking action, especially with nonprofits, especially when we have a very specific ask, whether it's volunteering, whether it's donating, we can't just take it as a one and done. I can't just run into you on the street, meet you for the first time, and ask you to marry me. We need to look at this as indicators around different tiers of engagement and how people move down that funnel. So you can see here we have it in 4 sections. We have awareness, we have interest, we have engagement, and ultimately we have commitment. We can look at this using one of our clients as an example, Power Poetry. They are the largest online database of teen poets. Our goal at the awareness stage is just that teens are finding power poetry online. And the metrics we can use to support this goal and see if we're getting closer to that goal are the number of site users broken down by source, the number of organic sessions coming in through search traffic that's not AdWords, the video views on site, and our reach on social media. At the engagement level, this is when people are starting to interact with the content on Power Poetry's site. And we can start to measure this by the number of poets we have, by number of newsletter subscribers, by the number of users who are spending more than 5 minutes on the page, who are downloading resources, downloading videos, and following us on social media. Then at the action level, this is when poems are being created and even when teachers are starting to come into the mix. So even though our main audience demographic is teens, we understand that the teachers who are assigning poetry assignments to teens play a major part in this. So at this point, we're looking at the poems created, building on the poets that are registered. We're also looking at teachers taking trainings on our site, and we're looking at super poets. How many poems are being posted per poet? And how many poets are posting more than 10 poems? Have fun saying that 5 times fast. And finally, we look at change. And the reason that Power Poetry exists is because it wants to improve literacy among teens using the medium of poetry. And on site, we can look at a qualitative improvement of the work of super poets over time, but also some of the metrics around this go way beyond anything that Power Poetry has direct control over. We're looking at college rates, how many kids are getting accepted into college. We can also look at prison rates because 85% of teens facing juvenile detention cannot read the sentence that's handed down to them from the judge. So then we have this idea, right, of these 4 tiers of engagement. We have a sense of metrics. Now, how do we distill what to measure? Because I just gave you a whole bunch of different things we can be looking at. We start to then plot them out then on this very handy matrix of importance versus measurability. We want to obviously make sure that we are getting important metrics because there are any number of things we could measure on Power Poetry's website that aren't going to let us know if the boat is going faster. So even though it may be easy to measure, if it is low in importance, this does us no good. It's just extra information. If it's low importance and also hard to measure, that's just going to make us cry. And we have so many other things that we could be crying about that this doesn't even merit a response. There are going to be some things that are hard to measure that are also high importance. So that's going to be a little more of the shocked face emoji on Facebook. But what we want to aim for is at least a couple of metrics over here, up and to the left, the high importance and easy to measure framework. Because we want to make sure that we are making it as easy as possible for us to track these data points going forward. So for Power Poetry, for instance, we could look at literacy improvement, which is really the reason that they're here, but that's a lot harder to measure, especially given the tools that they have available in their backyard. Content visits on their website, easy to measure, but a little less important. They're a supporting metric at a very early stage of engagement. But once we get to the number of poets registered on the site and the number of poems posted, that's both a very high important metric and a very easy to measure metric because of Google Analytics. A couple of other examples of this from some of our other clients, Donate Life America, which is the largest online registry of eye, organ, and tissue donors. One of the reasons they're around is to increase that sentiment around donation, because even though most people agree that it's important to have these resources available to us, very few people are actually registered as donors. So sentiment is a huge thing for them, a lot harder to measure. And the real reason they're here is to get people to register. So organ registry, again, easily track through their website, and so important, even more important than that sentiment. We can also look at our friends at DoSomething.org, which get kids and teens to take action for the causes they believe in. And we can see how the overall goals of lifelong volunteerism, social engagement, and an overall sense of having impact on the world, especially if it's a secondary impact, a ripple effect of something you did, we can see how that's supported by people signing up to take action and then reporting that action, because those are, you know, two of the indicators that we're moving in the right direction. So again, we're measuring all of this through Google Analytics, and I'm sure for those of you who are familiar with our Whole Whale webinars, you have heard us talk a lot about this. It is a free web analytics tool for your website. It's easily inserted onto your website through a little bit of JavaScript. It lives on every page. Every website code base can handle it. It takes less than half an hour to install. And it basically gives you a what, where, how, and when of the activities that happen on your website. Not so much on the why, but there are a lot of different ways that you can start to intuit why based on things like the psychology of design, or the questions that you're asking people to take, or using context for your digital campaigns. But one thing I want to talk about, especially within Google Analytics today, is the goals, because Google Analytics can tell you a lot of stuff if you tell it what to tell you. Part of this comes down to setting goals. Unfortunately, no puppies are included with your Google Analytics installation, but talk to me afterwards and we can at least send you this GIF. So on the front page of a website like Power Poetry, what users are going to see are a lot of calls to action. They're going to see the connect button for Facebook. They're going to see a login button, a sign up button, a button to add a poem. They're even going to get a pop-up or something coming up as they scroll down, further encouraging them to sign up. These are all then configured through Google Analytics and Google Tag Manager as goals and events, so that we can track these actions and know exactly where on the website triggers are succeeding and where triggers may be failing. We want to make sure, for instance, that plenty of people are clicking on this add a poem button because it is right there smack dab in the middle of the header. And we want to make sure that they're also not forgetting to connect on Facebook or to sign up if they haven't signed up. This is what we see on the front side, and this is what we are able to distill on the back end, is configuring each of these as goals. We'll see it from this side as well in Google Analytics. You can see, for instance, that we have goals like new poets, new poem added, interested user, which we consider to be a user that spends more than 5 minutes on site. Again, you can see how metrics start to feed into these user personas, into these goals that we want people to take, even if it's a little more qualifiable, like interest, or interest also can be categorized as the number of pages viewed per session. So once we get into here, we can start setting goals and say to Google Analytics, okay, Google, you are going to let me know every single time a user has shared Power Poetry on social media, every time they've referred a friend, every time they have requested to join a group. And then all of a sudden, we start to see how all of these supporting metrics start to build towards a momentum that makes this metaphorical boat go faster. The other thing that we can start to do with Google Analytics is understand how effective our site is in getting us across that chasm of output to outcome. The problem is that so many people get stuck on the question, what are people doing on our site? Which is a very broad question, and I can answer it for you in one of 5 ways, and I bet it's probably the same for everyone. Leaving on the weekends, returning during the week, because very few people are on the internet on the weekend compared to the week. Coming from major cities, coming from 4 major sources of traffic, bouncing from our homepage at a rate of, I'm going to guess, 60 to 80%, and increasing when we send our emails. This is something that is applicable to just about any website, for-profit, nonprofit, for benefit. What we can start to ask are questions that help us to make decisions based on the data. Where is our front door? How are people actually landing on our website? What is the first page on our website that they see? It is most likely not the homepage, especially if they're coming in from organic traffic or from AdWords traffic or from social traffic. Speaking of organic traffic, how is that doing year over year? A 20% year over year increase in organic traffic indicates that we have a healthy search engine optimization strategy, that we have a healthy content strategy, and that we're meeting users on their level. How is mobile traffic responding? Is our mobile traffic going up or down? Is this indicative that there's an issue with the site? Is there an issue with responsiveness? Or are we reaching decision makers? And one of the best ways of getting to understand what exactly the good questions are for your site is by asking your team what they need to know. Again, understanding the data that's going to be most meaningful for your organization is going to help set a lot of this roadmap for configuring your Google Analytics in a way that is useful. And then we can compile all of this into dashboards. We have our own starter pack for Google Analytics dashboards. You can download it at wholewhale.com/Google. And then within your Google Analytics, you can really easily hit create and import our download from your gallery. And what you'll start to see are things like an executive dashboard, which is great for people, especially at the C level, to just get a very 10,000-foot view of what your site is doing week after week, month over month, quarter over quarter. And from there, drilling down into other areas like AdWords performance, organic traffic, mobile traffic. You can set these up to automatically email on a certain frequency on a certain day of the week, so that we're starting to build this as muscle memory. Rather than having to log into Google Analytics every time, you can have this delivered to your virtual doorstep, and then just start to look at it and ask the same round of questions and glean insights. We can also look at this from Data Studio, which is a great way of presenting data to board members or to other stakeholders. You can also download that pack at wholewhale.com/Data Studio. And thank you so much for joining. We are on the socials at Whole Whale and at wholewhale.com. We also have a number of resources on Google. We have video trainings. We have several online courses, as well as our podcast. And thank you so much to our co-host, Sarah. Sarah is at sarahbeststrategy.com. Her number and email are here as well. And you can also keep learning with us at Whole Whale. You can access any of our 5 Whole Whale U courses for free with the promo code Whole Whale, WWU webinar, I should say. And you can also check out our newest toy for Google Analytics. Lighthouse by Whole Whale is an add-on that allows you to see what each email subscriber is doing on your site. It is very creepy, but creepy for good, as we like to say. And I think we have a few minutes for question and answer, if you want to share that with us, Jazz.
Absolutely. We did get a couple of great questions in. First question from Melissa. She would like to know more about how you would go about setting up templates in Canva for use by an internal team.
Sure. So it's pretty easy. If you get into Canva, you can actually access like a ton of different templates that they have pre-made in there. And then you can, if you have a paid account, which is $12 a month, so this is the only thing that doesn't come with the free account, you can save your brand colors and your branded fonts and your logo in there to adjust those templates that they have set up. So if you are in like a Canva template, you can just click on any element on the graphic and switch it over to one of your branded colors. They make it very easy. You can, for teams, sometimes get away with just sharing one account login. They let you have folders, which is nice, so you can organize things by project, or you can purchase different team accounts. It really just depends on what your situation is, if people need to be logged in to a certain number of accounts at once.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. Erin would like to know, in your experience, either Sarah or Olivia, what do different stakeholders like to see in terms of data? So thinking about donors, volunteers, executive team members, what in your experience do they like to see in regards to data?
Yeah, it's really good to consider different audiences and not speak to, essentially it's the same as not speaking to your mother the same way that you would speak to your best friend. The more zoomed out, the better, in my experience, for executive level, helping them to see the big picture and helping them to more effectively glean insights from that level, usually one insight or action per department, depending on the size of the organization. And then when we're looking at other dashboards and reporting, it's breaking down, similar to how Sarah talked about a mission statement just for social media. There are metrics that we would recommend, or goals we would recommend setting around each department within an organization as they relate to that larger, big, huge, ambitious goal. So once you have those narrowed down, it sort of becomes pretty straightforward to understand what metrics are going to matter most. And part of it will also come down to talking with your team and understanding what their priorities are, why they think your organization has a website, the purpose that they see in that website, and codifying it from there. We have a couple of other resources on that too. When we post this webinar, we can include those as well.
Great, thanks, Olivia. And just to be mindful of time, we have one more question coming in. What are some free or low-cost tools you recommend to help simplify an organization's workflow?
I use Google Drive version of like Excel all the time. When we do whiteboarding sessions, what we do is we make a copy of the whiteboard into a Google spreadsheet, organized by topics, then like who can help us get the word out this month, what's going on in our audience lives this month. The nice thing about Google Drive is that it's free. Most people understand how to use Excel, so you don't have a lot of extra training that needs to happen, and you can share it with people no matter where they're located. So frequently, even with smaller organizations, you might be at different sites. And so having cloud-based tools can really make a big difference in getting everyone on the same page and improving your workflow. And similarly with storing your files too, you can use something like a Dropbox to keep all of your images in one place. That makes a big difference if you're doing different marketing activities as well.
I'll second Google Drive. We actually also use that to store our images, which is super helpful when we need to quickly access and replace a file. On Whole Whale side, we also love using a couple of simple project management tools. Asana is the one that we use to make sure that projects are moving forward, especially when there are a number of team members working on any given project. And then I think part of it is also just codifying how best to share information within your team. So for instance, Slack can be a great inter-office messaging service that cuts down on email. But you know, if it's not something that your team needs in order to make the boat go faster, then you know, it's all about finding also the other areas where you do need that little extra boost.
Awesome, thanks both. And with that said, I'd like to thank all of our attendees and both of our co-hosts for presenting, Olivia and Sarah, so thank you very much. For the attendees, we will be sharing the recording, the decks, and additional resources following this webinar via email, so look out for that and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.